welcome to the deep dive.
Mm.
Okay, get ready, because your understanding of dinosaur history might just get a little nudged today.
It'd be even shoved.
Exactly. We're talking about Ahvaytum bondoivesh. It's a brand newly identified dinosaur from Wyoming dating back to the late Triassic.
And this isn't just, another fossil find. It's potentially rewriting the early dinosaur family tree.
Yeah, it seems to challenge that long-held idea that, well, that they all got their start down south in Gondwana.
Precisely. Ahvaytum has a really significant title right now. It's the oldest named dinosaur found on the ancient landmass of Laurasia.
Laurasia, so that's North America, Europe, and Asia, basically.
That's right. Think of it as the current elder statesman of Laurasian dinosaurs.
Okay. So our mission for this deep dive is to figure out why this find is such a big deal for, how we map out early dinosaur distribution.
And what makes Ahvaytum itself just so unique?
Right. Let's unpack this then. Where exactly did they find this history-making ankle bone?
Okay, so the spot has a great name, Garrett Surprise. It's in west central Wyoming.
Garrett Surprise.
Love it. And it's within the lower Popo-Ag Formation. Those are geological layers known for preserving late Triassic rocks.
Gotcha. And this wasn't like a super recent discovery that just hit the news, right? It goes back a bit.
You're right, yeah. The actual fossils were dug up back in 2013.
Okay, 2013. So what's the backstory there? Why are we only really digging into it now?
Well, interestingly, the first thoughts about what it might be, they were presented at a conference, I think in 2020. And back then, the suggestion was maybe it was linked to early theropods.
Theropods. So the lineage leading to T-Rex and that crowd.
Exactly. The group that eventually gave rise to those big meat eaters.
So they thought maybe an early predator, but it turned out to be something else entirely.
Mm-hmm.
What led to the shift? And the name. It's got a very cool name.
Right. So the formal description, the paper that actually established Ahvaytum bondoivesh as a new genus and species, that came out in 2025. Lovelace and colleagues.
And what was the key evidence?
The holotype specimen, that's the main reference fossil, it's an isolated left astragalus.
Just an ankle bone.
Just an ankle bone. But it holds a surprising amount of information, about how the animal moved, its evolutionary connections.
Wow.
And they also found a piece of a left femur, a thigh bone, nearby. Its anatomy lined up with what you'd expect for an early Saurischian dinosaur, so they referred it to Ahvaytum too.
It really is amazing how much history can be packed into just a couple of bone fragments.
It really is.
Okay, let's talk about that name. Ahvaytum bondoivesh. It definitely doesn't sound like your usual Latin or Greek dinosaur name. There's a story there, isn't there?
Absolutely. A really important one. The genus name, Ahvaytum, pronounced roughly Doldshiptum, it's Shoshone.
Shoshone, okay.
And it means long ago. Very direct, very fitting for how ancient this thing is.
Long ago. Perfect. And the species name, bondoivesh.
Right. Bondoivesh pronounced something like Panduitzia, also Shoshone. It means water's young man.
Water's young man. That's fascinating. Why that?
Well, get this. It's a term traditionally used for both dinosaurs and the local native salamanders, the colorful ones in the region.
No way. That's incredible. It connects the ancient past right to the living ecosystem.
Exactly. It's a beautiful link.
And this naming wasn't just like picking cool words out of a dictionary, was it? There was real engagement involved.
Precisely. The whole name, which is intended to mean long ago dinosaur, came about through collaboration. They worked with Eastern Shoshone elders and students using their native language.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it was okay, time-wise, it's late Triassic, specifically the Carnian stage. The research doesn't give an exact number in millions of years, but we're talking, deep time, hundreds of millions of years ago.
Right.
But the truly significant part is its location. It's the oldest dinosaur we've actually named from Laurasia.
The oldest one.
Wow. And before this, the prevailing hypothesis, the main idea, was that the group Ahvaytum seems to belong to the early sauropodomorphs. I started out in Gondwana.
Down south.
Down south, yeah. So Ahvaytum showing up in Wyoming really, it throws a wrench in that. It suggests these early dinosaur ancestors might have spread out much wider, much earlier than we thought.
So the story isn't just they started here and then spread.
Yeah.
It's more complex.
Much more complex. A wider early dispersal across the ancient world. It's a major shift in thinking about early dinosaur history.
Wow. Okay, so based on these few precious bones, what can we actually say about the animal itself? What did Ahvaytum look like? Any ideas?
Well, based on what we have, the estimate is pretty small. Probably around 3 feet long, maybe just under a meter.
3 feet. Tiny.
Yeah, and maybe only about a foot tall at the hip. So not a giant by any means.
How does that compare to, say, its relatives?
Good question. If you look at Eoraptor from Argentina, which is considered a close relative and known for much more complete fossils, Neoraptor was bigger, around 1.3 meters long, so maybe 4 feet or so.
Okay, so Ahvaytum might have been a more sort of petite member of the early sauropodomorph family, a northern cousin.
Possibly. Or perhaps just the individual found was smaller. We also need to consider its age.
Right, you mentioned the bones. Were they from a baby or fully grown?
The researchers think the fossils belong to an individual that was past the juvenile stage, so not a baby. But it seems it was still growing, just maybe slowly.
Okay, so maybe a subadult
Mhm.
or just an animal with a slower growth pattern compared to some others.
Exactly. We can't be completely sure with just these fragments, but that's the interpretation.
Still, even with limited material, it's giving us these crucial little windows into early dinosaur life.
Definitely.
Now, speaking of its place in the family, where did the researchers actually put Ahvaytum on the big dinosaur evolutionary tree?
Okay, so the phylogenetic analyses, those studies looking at evolutionary relationships done by Lovelace and his team, consistently group Ahvaytum close to those Gondwanan sauropodomorphs we mentioned.
Like Eoraptor.
Exactly. Specifically Eoraptor and another one called Burriolestes, both from South America.
So it's hanging out with the southern crowd, even though it's in the north?
Kind of. Their analysis, using a method called maximum parsimony.
Which is basically looking for the simplest family tree, right? The one with the fewest evolutionary steps.
You got it. That analysis suggests that Ahvaytum, along with Eoraptor, Burriolestes, and another one called Mburosaurus from Africa,
Africa, too.
all belong together in a broader definition of a family called Saturnalidae.
Okay, so the Saturnalidae family is getting bigger, including members from Gondwana and Laurasia now.
That's the idea. It suggests this family, Saturnalidae, as they're now defining it, represents a very early or basal branch within the larger sauropodomorpha group.
Basal meaning it branched off earlier than others.
Correct. If you look at the cladogram, the family tree diagram in the paper, it shows this group pretty clearly. You have Ahvaytum, Mburosaurus, Burriolestes, Eoraptor forming this distinct Saturnalidae bunch, and they branch off before other early sauropodomorphs like Panphagia, Pampodromaeus, and the Boglosauria group.
And then later you get things like Plateosaurus and eventually the giant longness.
Oh, way down the line, yeah. This whole early group, including the Saturnalidids, comes before dinosaurs like Saturnalia itself, confusingly, Nandumirum, Cremogysaurus, and then Plateosauria.
So finding Ahvaytum in Wyoming and a Mburosaurus in Africa really expands the known geographic range of this very early dinosaur group.
Hugely. It paints a picture of a much more widespread and diverse group right near the dawn of the dinosaurs than we maybe appreciated before. Their origins might be more complicated than just starting in one spot in Gondwana.
It really is like putting together an ancient jigsaw puzzle with just a few, but incredibly important pieces.
That's a good way to put it.
Okay, let's shift gears a little. What about the world Ahvaytum lived in? What was its neighborhood like back in the late Triassic?
Well, there's other research from 2024 by Deckman, Lovelace, and Holland that looked into the paleo environment of the Popo-Agie Formation.
And what do they find?
They suggest it was part of what's called a distributive fluvial system.
Fluvial, so river-related.
Yeah, basically imagine a large river system spreading out, fanning into maybe smaller streams, wetlands, that kind of environment.
Okay, so a dynamic, watery landscape. Who else was living there? Did Ahvaytum have many neighbors?
Oh, yeah. The lower layers of the Popo-Agie, where Ahvaytum came from, have preserved other cool stuff, too. There were these things called Sulcimentasaurian silosaurids. They're early dinosaur relatives, but not quite dinosaurs.
Pterosaurids, right.
Also, some big amphibians, the temnospondylus, Anasisma, and Gwentner pipin, huge salamander-like things. And the Phytosaur parasuchus, which looked a lot like a crocodile but wasn't directly related.
So a pretty diverse crowd just in its immediate layer.
Definitely. And if you look at slightly different layers within the same Popo-Agie formation, you find other creatures too. Things like the Rhynchosaur bisaiwo, a sort of pig-like reptile with a beak.
Weird.
The Pseudosutians, Heptasuchus, and Papasaurus, early relatives of crocodiles, some of which walked on 2 legs.
Bipedal croc relatives.
Okay, and the Dicynodont eubrachiosaurus. That's a distant relative of us mammals, actually. Kind of a tusked herbivorous synapsid.
Man, the Triassic was wild. A real snapshot of biodiversity before the dinosaurs fully took over.
It really was a fascinating time. Ahvaytum was part of this vibrant, changing world.
Okay, so let's try and sum this up. We've covered a lot. What are the really big takeaways from this deep dive into Ahvaytum Bondovesh? What should stick with us?
Well, I think takeaway number one has to be its status. Ahvaytum is currently the oldest named dinosaur we know from Laurasia. Full stop.
Oldest in the north.
Oldest known in the north, yeah. And that directly challenges the old sauropodomorphs started only in Gondwana theory.
Right, it points to them spreading out much earlier, much wider across the globe than we thought.
Exactly. Just think about that one relatively small discovery, a few bones, forces us to rethink the whole global picture of early dinosaur distribution. It's pretty fundamental.
And it's not just a scientific landmark either, is it? The way it was named feels really significant too.
Oh, absolutely. That collaboration with the Eastern Shoshone community. It's a fantastic example of blending scientific discovery with respect for the cultural heritage of the place.
It shows how science and indigenous knowledge can work together.
Yes, and it's a really powerful and positive step. Hopefully a model for future discoveries elsewhere, too.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive, maybe a final thought for you, the listener.
Consider how this discovery, based on just fragmentary bones found somewhat by surprise.
Garrett's surprise.
Garrett's surprise, exactly. How it can fundamentally shift our view of deep history, of how interconnected these ancient lands were.
It makes you wonder, what other long-held assumptions are just waiting for the right fossil, maybe even a small one, to challenge them? What else don't we know?
Always more to discover.
Indeed. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.